was really curious if anybody offered a little loving kindness in that lunch break and how it was. So once again, some really kind people are going to run around with microphones if you have anything to say. And then we'll go on to more formal loving kindness practices at hand that we're preparing.
Hi. So I was on my way to lunch, and I'm not used to walking in crosswalks where cars are trying to kill me. So and I had the signal, right? It had the walk, so I was walking, and the guy had to move over so he could get into the lane. And my first thought was not very loving or kind at all. And then as he drove past, I was like, may you be happy, may you be healthy. So it did work because but it was. My first thought was not anything close to that. It was lots of expletives involved, but I was able to bring back literally just taught. So it was really wonderful for me that way.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank you for sharing your Lucy story, Sharon, because I have Lucy on steroids inside, and when I went to lunch,
I just had a little image of like a football player.
yeah, exactly, like she's like a gladiator. And so last night or Thursday night, when I shared with you how some of the backdrop for me has been expressing itself with my husband, so we went to lunch, and Lucy came, and I actually, for the first time, I think, in as long as I can remember, I demonstrated some loving kindness to myself, which is very difficult for me, because when I think about loving kindness for myself, I always compare my suffering to other people, and I think, just hush, why are you complaining? Like, you have nothing to complain about, and it starts down that road. And then I become very militant with myself about offering loving kindness to myself, because I don't see my suffering in context. And so when Lucy reared her head just now with my husband, God, he's such a saint. He's such a saint. Internally, I was like, chill out, Lucy. And my husband was like, huh? She was like, who's Lucy? I was like, I'll tell you, we'll talk about that later. But I really wanted to share that because that was incredibly helpful for me.
Great.
To give it a persona and to give it almost like an external thing that I can look at instead of internalizing it as being part of me.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Sheila. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The women's bathroom was beautiful. There were 15 women in there or so, and I got to bless each one of them in a different way, and it was just, the bathroom is not usually the place you go for happiness, but it was a good moment.
That's fabulous.
Just an observation. I hope that this afternoon that we'll be talking, or tomorrow, about kindness and metta and long-standing relationships.
Sure. If not today, then certainly by tomorrow. Anybody else? Was it fun? I I always have fun when I do things like that. Like, we'll talk about walking meditation, which doesn't have to be done walking. It just means being more outward, like eyes open, more connected to the world around you. It could be sitting and having a cup of coffee in a cafe or something, but it's some sense of that broader kind of arena. And a little bit of a sense of the unknown, because if your eyes are open and you're just aware of things coming by or coming in and out of the store or something like that, you have no control over that, right? Maybe you're afraid of dogs and it's a dog, it's a big dog, or whatever it might be. And so one of the things I enjoy about doing loving kindness, say going down the streets of New York City, that I find really fun is that I see in my own mind all the same judgments might arise, but they're capped with a little bit of loving kindness, like, why are you wearing that jacket? I'll be happy. And it's like, that's interesting to me. Or sometimes I'm going down the streets of New York doing loving kindness, which I try to always do, and somebody is coming in the opposite direction, from the opposite direction, and they give you this really big smile, and then I think, oh, maybe they're doing it too. We have like a little secret love club going on, which is pretty fun. Okay, anybody else?
But we can do that for ourselves too.
Yeah, we certainly can do it for ourselves.
So when we find that we're
Just to bring you the microphone.
when we're calling ourselves stupid or whatever, it's ridiculous.
So I was saying we could do that for ourselves. We can certainly, actually this happened at lunch. I was at lunch with a friend, an old friend and a new friend, and she called herself something not nice when the bill came, because we were doing math and we're not mathematicians. And I said, but you're so lovable. But we could do that for ourselves. So like when we drop something and we're like, God, we're so dumb, we're so stupid. But I love you anyways, right? So it's just the habit, it's the training of the habit. And I also find that from a visualization, I know like somebody called me a Care Bear, not to date myself because of the outfit I'm wearing, but I find that if you're a visual person, when you're walking down the street, I kind of imagine I am a Care Bear and I'm just like beaming rainbows at people, So that helps me.
Great. So, and this is something else, I want to, there are different ways of approaching the formal practice of loving kindness, so I want to talk about it in different ways. One, beginning with what you just said, is it doesn't really have to happen with phrases. That's the way I was taught, that's the way I teach. And I find it a very useful way. Sometimes people are more visual, and there's more of a sense of offering, energy, light, whatever it might be. Sometimes, well, they say that in any one moment of doing loving kindness practice where instead of resting your attention on the feeling of the breath as that primary object or home base, the thing you keep coming back to, the way I would teach it, and will teach it, is we rest our attention on the silent repetition of certain phrases. So that replaces the breath. May I be happy, be peaceful. May you be happy, be peaceful. Something like that. Usually 3 or 4 phrases in sitting meditation. But in any one moment, maybe the phrase is not the strongest thing going. Maybe it's the sense of the recipient, either visually or just energetically. You just feel that being. Or maybe there is a feeling that is coming up in, just a sense. It may not be a big emotional feeling, although it might be. It may just be the sense of connection, a sense that you're finding yourself in someone else. You can kind of recognize their humanity, or, there's something. Maybe that's the strongest thing going on in any moment. So you don't have to hurry and hasten back to the phrase, if one of those other things is going on. But Ultimately, I like coming back to the phrases because not everyone has a great capacity for visualization. That's just a personal thing. And the feeling, the sense, the meaningfulness of it needs to be there, so you're not just repeating something meaningless by rote, but it may not be, a big intense feeling, which is what we tend to want, and the only thing we tend to validate. So, speaking of the ways we speak to each other and dropping things, well, another thing I would say about any meditation practice, and definitely about loving kindness practice, is that you will see the result of your practice very likely not so much in your formal sitting of 10 or 20 minutes a day or however long that is. You will see it in your life. You'll see it in the way you speak to yourself. When you've made a mistake, you'll see it in the way you are with another, new people, long-standing relationships, all of that. You'll see it in that sense of connection or a lack of connection to kind of a bigger picture of life in those ways. And that is really the most important thing, because that's really why we practice, not to, write in some, blog about the sterling experience we had meditating at 8:20 this morning. It's because of how we want to live in a more authentic and a more connected way. So I've seen a lot of people through many, many years of teaching be pretty disappointed because they were counting on like that big breakthrough experience at 4:30, so then they love themselves completely forevermore, or and they're not really thinking about how they are with their neighbor or their kid or something like that. But that's what's going to happen. I mean, one of my famous experience, or somewhat famous experiences about that, is a friend took me out to lunch, a student in New York City, and he said to me, "I just have to confess something." And I said, "Oh, what?" And he said, "I've been practicing loving kindness meditation every day for about 3 years, whether I'm on retreat or I'm just sitting at home." And he said, "I can't honestly say my experience sitting is that different now, 3 years later, than it was way back when." But he said, "I'm like a different person. I'm different with myself, I'm different with my family, I'm different ethically, I'm different with my community." And he said to me, "Is that enough?" And I said, "Yeah, maybe I think it's enough, And it's kind of the point, anyway, So, one of the reasons I emphasize the phrases is because I de-emphasize the feeling. I have just seen in my own practice and in the practice of thousands of people at this point. You might think nothing's happening, and it can be sort of discouraging because you're zeroing in on that formal period of practice and you don't have that great breakthrough, and yet you're really different over a period of time. It takes a while, but it happens. And sometimes what's even more ironic is that other people can see the changes in us before we see it in ourselves. Lots of times people will say to me, "I was going to stop meditating, I thought nothing was happening." Then my kids came to me and said, "Please don't stop, you're much better." So maybe they see it in us, and then we see it in our life. How we meet a stranger, how we speak to ourselves, how we, face an adversarial condition, things like that. How we face an illness, all kinds of things. And only maybe, and it doesn't even matter, if ever, then we see it like sitting on the cushion, or however we practice formally. So almost my signature story of loving kindness practice as a method. So I went to India, as I said, in 70. I began mindfulness practice in 71. And right at the end of that 10-day retreat, Goenka, who was the teacher, introduced metta, loving kindness practice, almost as a kind of ceremonial way of saying goodbye. Like, here's the last thing we're going to do together as this community. And I was really like, what's that? I want to know more about that one. But I didn't really have a situation to have a formal teacher in loving kindness and a situation of doing intensive loving kindness in a systematic way until 1985 when I went to Burma and did a 3-month retreat. But long before then, in 1976, we established the Insight Meditation Society. We moved in on Valentine's Day, and there was no programming for a month. So those of us who were there thought, oh, let's just sit ourselves for a month, which I highly recommend, by the way. If you establish a center, you know, just have like a month retreat, everyone can come. I mean, come and go. I don't think you can necessarily stay. Anyway, so I thought, okay, I've got a month, and I've never had a teacher in loving kindness meditation, but I know how it's done, so I'll do that. So, as an overview, which we'll go into in much more detail later and tomorrow, in loving kindness practice, in a kind of classical way, there's an arc of offering. And the underlying principle is creating a sequence so that it's done in the easiest way possible. You start with the easiest being to offer loving kindness to, and then you move through shades of difficulty or distance till we come to all beings everywhere. So that is starting with oneself, which is a very interesting reflection. Apparently 2,600 years ago in India, there was no one easier than yourself to offer loving kindness to. So if that is far from the truth, we just simply go back to the original principle. Well, start with someone that's easy for, then put yourself in later, something like that. But you know, the classical sequence is yourself, and then you offer loving kindness to a benefactor. A benefactor is someone who's helped you. Maybe they've helped you directly, they've mentored you, they've taken care of you, they've picked you up when you've fallen down. Maybe you've never met them, but they've inspired you from afar. This is meant to be like an embodiment of love or loving kindness for you. It could be an adult, it could be a child, it could be a pet. The texts say this is the one who when you think of them, you smile. So is there someone that just makes you smile when you think of it? Maybe not. That's okay, don't despair. You know, but if so, then that becomes the next recipient. And I don't mean all within one, squished in one sitting. This is over a long period of time. We're kind of continually stretching and expanding and including different aspects of our being. So oneself, a benefactor, a friend, a neutral person, someone we don't strongly like or dislike. And this often, it's suggested you choose someone who plays some kind of role in your life, so you're likely to see them, at least periodically. You can just see if that sense of connection has evolved in some way. Then a difficult person. So yourself, benefactor, friend, a neutral person, a difficult person. And going back to that original principle, it said to be good to start with a mildly difficult person. Not the most unimaginable person on earth, you know, the one who's hurt you so badly, or in your eyes has behaved so terribly on the world stage that it's just unthinkable. Like start with someone you're a little bit annoyed with, you know, and maybe more slowly. We do make our way over, but it's a little like strength training, you know. Why they would say, like a Burmese meditation teacher would say, why do it in the hardest way possible? You know, why not build up that strength and that clarity and that confidence and then go there? And then we come to all beings everywhere. Okay, so that's the trajectory. So there I was in 1976 about to start a month retreat. And since I knew how it was done by then, even without a teacher, I thought, okay, I'll just do it. And I spent the first week of the retreat just offering loving kindness to myself, like all day long. May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be happy, may I be peaceful. And I felt absolutely nothing. It was like a completely dreary week. And then at the end of the week, something happened to one of our friends, like in our larger community in Boston. So several of us had to leave the retreat very suddenly. So I got busted, so I was up in one of the bathrooms, getting ready to go, when I dropped this big jar of something that just like went down on the ground, and it shattered on the tile floor, and the stuff went everywhere. And I can remember the very first thought that came up in my mind was, you are really a klutz, but I love you. And I thought, look at that. You could have given me anything in the course of the week, and I could not have honestly said something was happening, and something was happening. Right? So my recommendation is usually, if you want to take it on as an ongoing practice for a while, make an experiment of it. You do want to assess and evaluate, is this worth continuing? But first of all, not every moment, because then you're never doing the practice, you're just evaluating. And once you set a time frame, like, okay, I'm going to try it every day for a month, for a few minutes a day. And at the end of the month, I will take a look to see if it's worth pursuing further. But the place to look is your life. That's where you'll really see the effect, if there is one, okay? And another thing that came up in my mind when you were speaking just now is, the form is really just to help us unfold our practice. There's nothing of absolute truth about these categories. It's just a structure to help us keep stretching, keep experimenting. Life's not that uniform, it's not that rigid. Many times people will say something like, well, you know, I thought of this person who was my benefactor, and I was filled with gratitude, and I felt so much loving kindness. And then I thought, you know, there was that one time when I called you and you weren't really there for me. Like, maybe you're not my benefactor, maybe you're my difficult person. As the Dalai Lama says, quoting this great Tibetan sage of old, friends become enemies, enemies become friends. Life is molten, it's ever-changing. We just use the categories as a way of, you know, going through a process. But it's not, you know, it's not worth holding rigidly. So I did have a friend once early on when I was first teaching loving kindness, like in '85 or so. She sat at a loving kindness retreat with me, and she said at night she was asleep and dreaming that she completely, in those days we had like Rolodexes, right? She completely like rearranged her Rolodex according to like, oh, these are my benefactors, these are my friends, these are my difficult people. And I've often said I had a fantasy of someday teaching a retreat where we just chose one recipient, and the parts of them we admired, they were like our benefactor, and the parts of them we felt at ease with, they were like our friend. The parts of them we didn't know, they were like our neutral person. The parts of them we didn't like, they were like our difficult person. And I was telling somebody this, and they said to me, well, we can just choose ourselves, because we play all of those roles with ourselves, right? Sometimes we are the difficult person. So what I really like in teaching is, you know, to kind of do it the old-fashioned way and offer it that way, making it clear that if it becomes part of your practice, it's really your practice to mold and change and recreate, you know, and do whatever seems right to you with the practice. But I think it's really good to do that on the foundation of the classical unfolding. So just as one more example of that, in 1993, 94, I was working on my first book, Loving Kindness, which came out in 1995. And I didn't have a computer, my own computer, and I knew almost nobody who did. I had a few friends who had computers. So in those days, some of you may remember, cutting and pasting meant getting a pair of scissors. Seriously. Cutting out the paragraph you wanted to move, moving it up and down the page, figuring out where you wanted it to go, getting a roll of Scotch tape and taping it there. That was cutting and pasting. It was really slow. I mean, it was such a slow process. And I did notice that my few friends who had their own computers talked about nothing else, ever. I thought, what are they going on about, you know? But I was very intimidated. I thought, I could never learn how to use a thing like that, ever. You know, it's way too much. So I was continuing on like scissors. You know? One day at IMS, we got a message that we're getting a visit from a 94-year-old one from Sri Lanka. And he came, and he was absolutely lovely. We were up in one of the rooms talking to him, and he mentioned he was learning how to use a computer. And I thought, okay. He's 94 years old, and he's learning how to use a computer. I can too. And then he said he wanted to go into the meditation hall and give a talk. And we had a retreat that was ongoing, so we just needed to like ring a bell and gather everybody into the hall. So I thought, okay, he's 94 years old, it won't be a very long talk. Great. So we got into the hall, and it was an endless talk. It was endless, it was hours. He had so much energy. He had more energy than all of us put together, I think. And in the course of the endless talk, he said, I want to teach you my favorite meditation, which was basically, some of you may be familiar with the body scan through MBSR or some other means. It was basically a combination of loving kindness and a body scan. It was moving his attention throughout his body, but offering loving kindness. Like, may my head be happy. May my eyes be happy. May my nose be happy. And he just like went through, and I was like, maybe that's why he has so much energy. You know, because it actually is an extraordinary thing to do. The things that are, you know, making us ill, whatever it is. You know, there's a certain kind of relationship of victory over the vanquished, which works for some people. It's being in battle, say with, you know, disease. And for some people that actually doesn't work. What works is more of a kind of loving kindness embrace, which doesn't mean, Lucy, may you take over, right? It doesn't mean may you run the show, but it's some kind of integration into a bigger picture of life, like yes, that the relationship of love or compassion is not one of giving in, but it's one of being in connection with. And much healing actually happens from that different relationship. So there are all kinds of ways people use these principles and these kinds of practices. And you know, we do start with kind of classical progression and get some confidence in that, and then it's really, it's a very creative and open process. So, the quality of loving kindness is talked about in conjunction with three other qualities. And you could say these are like different faces of love. Loving kindness itself is that force of connection. It's that deep acknowledgement that our lives have something to do with one another. That we live in an interdependent universe. In some ways, we're all part of a bigger whole of life. And one of the bases for loving kindness to arise is remembering or feeling, if we believe it, that all beings really do want to be happy. And the corollary to that is that everybody counts, everybody matters. Not everyone's going to be my best friend, but everyone is part of this bigger picture of life to which we all belong. The second quality is compassion, which in English, you know, casual conversation, we always use as though they're the same word. And in Buddhist psychology, they're actually a little different. They're very close, but they're also a little different. I ran into a lot of trouble, some book or another, with another editor, where she said, you know, I brought up the word loving kindness in this, I think it was a marketing meeting or editorial meeting. She said, everyone in the room laughed, and they said, what's that? And she explained, and they said, well, can't you just say compassion? Which, if you're part of a tradition that is excruciatingly precise about language, was like, But of course we do, because that's just common conversation. But compassion is considered a little different, while very closely aligned with loving kindness. Compassion is the trembling or the quivering of the heart in response to seeing pain or suffering. So it's a movement of the heart, and it's a movement toward to see if we can be of help. If loving kindness is more based on feeling like everybody really does want to be happy, compassion is more based on realizing our universal vulnerability. That we don't at all share the same measure of pain in life, because we don't. But we do share, each of us, without exception, a kind of vulnerability to change, to loss. Anybody could pick up their cell phone, check their messages, and have a different life than the one they had before. It's just the way it is. And so, if anything, that should make us feel closer to one another and wanting to help take care of one another, and even maybe help receive care from someone else. Because we can confuse compassion with a very hierarchical state, like I, whose life is so perfect, and it always will be, and bestowing this kindness on you way down there as life has fallen apart, which might never ever could, because guess what? It could. So compassion is really much more equal kind of state. And it's a movement toward, not a movement into. Because if we move into it or are completely immersed in that pain or suffering, we don't have the energy to see if we can be of help. In some strange way, our own distress, our own bad feeling has actually taken center stage, and it's debilitating. So it's a movement toward to see if we can be of help. Right? This is a practice of generosity as well. And like any practice of generosity, for it to be, you can say in its purest form, it needs to be a freely given gift. Because we know what it's like, you give someone, say, a book, and it's like, thank me, would you? Tell me it's the best book you've ever gotten in your whole life. Tell me you're throwing out all your other books. You're keeping this one. Just tell me, right? Or we can give them the book, I've made you enjoy it. Or we can give someone anything, like, wouldn't you like to give me that in exchange? I mean, look at that yoga mat, it's really an interesting color. How about if I give you this microphone, which isn't even mine? And you give me that yoga mat. There's so many ways to give a gift, and not all of them involve that kind of freedom of the heart, just like here. May you enjoy it. But that's the possibility for us, to see if we can be of help. So compassion, too, is a state that deserves quite a bit of exploration. The third quality is called sympathetic joy, or joy in the happiness of others. If compassion leads us to a different relationship to suffering, so we find one another, we find a sense of community, we find a sense of care. Sympathetic joy often has us re-look at our relationship to joy and to pleasure. Sympathetic joy literally means joy in the happiness of others. So when we look at someone's success and good fortune, normally we fall sway to that little voice that arises inside and says, ew, I wish you just didn't have so much going for you right now. You don't have to lose everything, but if the light could just dim a bit, I'd feel better. Sympathetic joy is, some people, they just seem to have it naturally. Like, it just shines out of them, and I find them the most remarkable people. You know, something good happens for you, and they're so happy for you. Whereas other people, it's like they may smile, but you really get the feeling they would be fine if it all fell apart for you, and it feels so terrible. For most of us, for some of us it will be natural. For most of us it's a training, it actually is. Because we need to confront certain assumptions that are making it more difficult for us, like happiness is a limited commodity in this world, and the more someone else has, the less there's going to be for me. Like, you have everything and you will forever. And I have nothing and I will forever. So there are a few problems with that one. First of all, nothing is forever, nothing. Second of all, it's really unlikely I have absolutely nothing. If I'm breathing, I've got something good going. We may have nothing much we appreciate or taking the time to enjoy or be grateful for, but we don't have nothing. And it's awfully unlikely that they have everything. Right, so we have to kind of take apart some pretty strong assumptions. But then sympathetic joy does emerge. Somebody was telling me the other day that they're so much happier day by day than they used to be. And I said, why do you think that is? And they said, I think it's because I'm really growing in sympathetic joy. I've grown in sympathetic joy. And it just used to be this sort of like edge, you know? Because people's lives are just emerging. You can't say, you know, that's not fair, it's my turn. You know, put me on the New York Times bestseller list again. I don't know why you know, got on and, you know, they were looking for me, like you kidnapped them, you know. But we feel that way, sometimes. And, you know, it's just this edge, because you can't, like, stop someone's life from progressing, and everybody's going up and down, and you can't say, stay down, you know. That feels terrible, too. And to be free of that, and actually say, oh, wow, that's great, and feel it. I mean, there's a lot of joy there, right there. So I really understood what this person was telling me. So sympathetic joy is the third of these qualities. The fourth, which in some schools is actually talked about first, is equanimity. So it's loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. You can say these are the faces of real love, or facets of real love. So equanimity is another peculiar term. When I was sitting with Goenka, that first retreat and you know, onwards, he used to say all the time, be equanimous, be equanimous, be equanimous. And we used to whisper to one another, is that a word? I don't know what that word means. I never heard that word before. What is that? Equanimity does not mean indifference or callousness or coldness or withdrawal. It means balance, back to balance. And in this case, it's the balance that's born of wisdom. It's like trying to help somebody, you really care about them, and you realize, you know what, I will do everything I can, and it's not up to me. Would that it were. I keep waiting for some lab somewhere to make the chip that we can implant in someone else's brain, and we have the remote control. Like, cheer up. You know, I'm tired of your mood. But it's not like that, right? And there's a poignancy to that, because sometimes you really feel, and accurately probably feel, you have figured out what this person should do to be a whole lot happier, and you cannot make it happen. I think I was once teaching on a web thing for this friend of mine who's a yoga teacher in California, and this was her trainees to be yoga teachers, and I use this example right out of the Buddhist text for equanimity, which is, a parent whose child is now an adult. It's like you love them, there's compassion, there's certainly sympathetic joy, and you can't insist that they follow the career path you want them to do. That their partner be the person that you've chosen, you know? It's just not like that. That doesn't sever the love or undermine the compassion. It actually strengthens it. So there were a number of people, I couldn't see them because, you know, I could see just like the little slice of the room. But I used that example and everyone started hooting and howling. And she had to pick up the computer and show me everybody who were younger people who had young children, and they're all shouting, "It's not just adult children." You know, there needs to be a lot of letting go in that love. Letting the little being be the being that they are. You know, so equanimity doesn't take away from love. It doesn't detract from love or compassion. It actually strengthens it. This is what allows it to be a freely given gift. That we're not insisting on a certain return. You know, otherwise we're sunk. It's like, then we're not actually practicing loving kindness or love. We're not actually practicing compassion. It becomes sort of a distorted form of itself. And it's what one of my friends once called metta with an edge. Like, you know, you better be happy by, let's see, today's Saturday. I think I give you till Tuesday, maybe Wednesday, no later than Wednesday. I've got a long list of people to make happy, and you may be at the top of the list now, but you're not going to be at the top of the list forever. And speaking of lists, here's your list of everything you need to do to improve in order to be happy as I decided. And here's your timetable. Right? That's not exactly the freely given gift of love. So, when we talk about, you know, specific relationships, there are other factors to look at, mutuality, communication, and so on, and we will, I promise. You know, but this is sort of the framework, is these qualities. The reason that equanimity is sometimes taught first is because it has to be there, even if it's never spoken about. Or loving kindness won't be loving kindness. Compassion won't be compassion. They will assume and readily assume some distorted form of themselves. That love becomes, in, you know, classical Buddhist terms, it's called attachment. It's a little bit confusing in these days because of attachment theory and psychology, and you know, so when in the Buddhist psychology, when attachment's talked about, it's not about bonding and coming close. It's about basically control, wanting to be in control, wanting to keep someone from evolving or something from changing, and it doesn't work. It's what's so poignant about it is that we just can't hold on successfully as much as we might try. Life is moving. Maybe healing has its own rhythm. You know, change takes time. And that's the way it actually is. That's why the real, you know, all these book titles, there's something about being realistic, which also doesn't sound glamorous or sounds like deadly dull, but if we're not in touch with reality as it actually is, then it's like the proverbial banging your head against the wall. I really didn't want winter to come, but guess what? I've been doing that. Didn't work. Oh, my protestation, distress. This is the nature of things. I'm mystified by the fact that I can be introduced and somebody can say she's been meditating for more than 45 years. I think, really? How can that be? I don't understand that. I really don't. And one of my big bugaboos is that whenever I have to enter my birth year online, I have to scroll down for like an hour and a half. I don't get it. Like, why are you starting in 2007, you know? Nobody is going to buy your product who's like 3 years old, you know? Like, but I'm still going down, you know? It's like, how did that happen? You know, I didn't want it to happen. I still think of myself, not 18, but 30, you know? But life's not like that. So if you're not in touch with that reality, there's some very unpleasant surprises coming, you know? Right? So even if reality isn't like exuberant, you know, it's just the way it is. And the power of the truthfulness of it is what keeps us going. And is what is so important, and is what is ultimately uplifting, because it is that power. It's why loving kindness, which is a truthful response to how connected we actually are, is a powerful state. It's not just like a sweet, you know, avoidant state. So equanimity, seeing wisdom, seeing things as they actually are. Everything is changing. We're not in control. Things may take time. We also don't know a lot. That's a part of equanimity. Like, what we see in front of us, it may not be the end of the story. It's just what we see in front of us. You know, you give someone that book, you don't know, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, what the result might be. There's so many times when we do something or try to do good, and it really is just like planting a seed. And that's what it is. If we don't do that, maybe nothing will happen. But if we do that, we can't count on like an immediate result. It's just not like that. That's not real. That's not realistic. So all four of these qualities work together to really help us recreate every relationship we have to ourselves, to anyone we encounter or we know in life, and ultimately to all beings everywhere. So in terms of that specific practice, each of those qualities actually has its own practice, very similar to one another, using phrases, different phrases, using a sequence, slightly different sequence, based on the principle of doing it in the easiest way possible. But more commonly, in the interests of simplifying and deepening each of these qualities, we usually take one vehicle, which is usually the vehicle of loving kindness, and we do all four within that one vehicle. So we say equanimity is always there, otherwise it's not happening, right? So spoken or unspoken, that's got to be there, which means look, wisdom has to be there. If the recipient of your loving kindness, say, is a friend who's doing really well right now, they're getting an award, they're, you know, really successful, then it becomes like a sympathetic joy meditation. That's just the flavor of it. Even though you're using the same phrases as you did with loving kindness. If the recipient of your loving kindness is someone who's struggling right now, they're not doing so well, they're really in pain, they feel alone, then it becomes like a compassion meditation, even though you're still using loving kindness phrases. So that's what we're actually going to do through this next sitting and all through tomorrow, is use loving kindness as a means to explore all four of these states. So again, if you want to take a short break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the meditation, okay? We'll try for 10 minutes, maybe 15. We'll see. Hello. Maybe she just told me that. Your love or more than your love? She said at least one of my books is going to be available for sale tomorrow when it's over. But that's what I said, real love or others. But
Definitely real love.
definitely real love. We're so happy about that. Real love. Somebody asked about audio versions. There are audio versions of almost every one of my books. I mean, all of which have been read by me. So, I don't know how you feel about that fact, but for real love, I spent like 3.5 days in a closet. And it sounds to a really tiny little thing, reading that book. How's that? It's fine. Hello, it's better, thank you. So that was the arc for, as I said, a long view of the practice. You can't really do all of that in one sitting, or let's go back to the beginning. Tranquil and alert. Tranquil is accomplished through concentration, steadying our attention, gathering our energy around an object. And it's aided by simplicity, repetition, structure. That's why we say with the phrases, choose 3 or 4 phrases and see if they can be general enough so that you can use them with many beings. Otherwise, you know, you'll think of a new friend and you'll think, what about you? Let's see, you don't really have that parking problem anyway, you know, so like, you know, that's why it's like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful. Now sometimes, you don't want to be imprisoned by that. Sometimes someone will arise with a whole other set of phrases of their own, that's fine. But you don't want to have to like, get really restless and agitated thinking, I need new phrases I don't know what to say, right? So, and that's why there are only 3 or 4. Once somebody said to me, I can't remember my phrases, so I said, how many do you have? And they said about 15, and I said, no one can remember 15 phrases, right? It could be 2 phrases, 2 to 4, somewhere in there, 1 to 4 even. You know, we want things to be simple, repeated, you know, so that we can keep gathering and stabilizing. But we want them to be alive. We don't want no energy. Right? So that means it has to be meaningful. You're not just saying, you know, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola. It means something, and there's a recipient. You know, sometimes we need to make that recipient, whether it's ourselves or someone else, more vivid. And there are different reflections that we do. We use active imagination, like, what would it look like for you to be happy? But then we don't do that forever. Right? Because then we'll just end up. And after you move to Wisconsin, I think you should think about moving back to Florida. You know? So it's a balance. The concentration, the simplicity, and the energy, the aliveness. That's why we say in any one session, don't try to do everybody. You know, usually the book ends if you're sitting just for 15 or 20 minutes, or even less, is starting, let's say, with yourself, and ending with all beings everywhere. Maybe you have time for 1 person in between, or 2, maybe. And that's very creative and spontaneous in a way, like maybe you have a friend getting an award today, so that's the person you want to use in the middle. You have a friend having surgery today, that's the person you want to use in the middle. You're going to the dry cleaner, and your dry cleaner happens to be your neutral person. So you really want to do that in the middle. Or you're afraid of the conflict you're having with someone at work. You're actually anxious about seeing them. That's the person you might want to do in the middle. Right? But not everybody all at once, so we'll lose the concentration altogether. And if you are struggling, if it's really really difficult for you to start with yourself, it's fine. Start with a benefactor. Start with a being for whom it is easier. Do tuck yourself in later somewhere. You have to figure somewhere, but it could be a lot later. It doesn't really matter. Okay? So we're always going to come back to that principle of balance. And in this case, between the tranquility and the alertness. So I'd say, how many of you do loving kindness practice anyway? Okay, so you all have phrases, I assume. And it's fine if you want to just keep going with whatever those phrases are. The phrases I'll suggest are a good experiment to make, unless you really don't like one of the words. Like a lot of people don't like the word happy, I've discovered. And that's fine. You don't have to use it if it's a struggle in any way, but rather than spend this entire time trying to think of phrases, if you're not accustomed to this practice and you don't have a big problem with one of the phrases, what I would suggest, at least for now, are what are commonly used these days. So that's beginning with yourself. May I be safe? Or some people phrase it, feels safe. That's up to you. May I be safe? Be happy? Be healthy? Live with ease. Live with ease means in the things of day-to-day life, like livelihood or family, may it not be such a struggle. May I live with ease. May I be safe? Be happy? Be healthy? Live with ease. Now remember, we're not asking somebody to grant us happiness or health. It's not that practice, that particular practice. It's a practice of gift giving, offering, generosity. As my friend Sylvia Borstein would say, it's like you hand someone a birthday card and you say, may you have a great year. May you be happy, right? It's got some verve to it, it's giving. Okay, so if you don't have phrases, you might start with trying, may I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And it's not a practice where you have to force or manufacture a certain kind of feeling. Feelings will come and go, it's fine. But we steady our attention on the phrases. So throughout the rest of the weekend, I'll be offering or suggesting different variations on doing it this way with different beings in the middle. I say beings when I remember because it might be your puppy. That is your benefactor, and so on. Okay? So let's sit comfortably. Again, your eyes can be open or closed, however you feel most at ease. With your eyes open, they can be like a little bit open. You find a spot to rest your gaze, let it go. See if your energy can settle into your body. And you can silently begin repeating these 3 or 4 phrases over and over again. You want to repeat them with enough space and enough silence so that it's a rhythm that's pleasing to you. This is like the song of the heart. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease, or whatever phrases you may be using. And if your attention slips off, you get lost in thought, or you fall asleep, really, don't worry about it. You can recognize that you've been gone, see if you can let go, and in this case, come back to the phrases. And see if you can think of a benefactor, someone who's helped you, or someone who's inspired you. Someone who, when you think of them, you smile. And if someone comes to mind, you can bring them here. Get an image of them or say their name to yourself. Get a feeling for their presence. And offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. Even if the words seem quite imperfect, that's okay. Because they're like a vehicle for the heart's energy, so they're serving us. And if no one comes to mind, don't despair. You can just continue on with loving kindness for yourself. And see if you can bring to mind someone here you didn't know before you got here. You may not know their name or anything about them really, but you can just get a feeling for them. This is going to replace the neutral person, perhaps, in the sense that it's kind of like a generic living being who you know must want to be happy just as we do. Must be vulnerable to change and loss just as we are. See what happens as you offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. And then everybody here, which includes a whole variety of different relationships. Those whom you know quite well, perhaps, those whom you don't know at all, and yourself. So the phrases often become something like, may we be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. So thank you, all beings, thank you. Whenever I, especially when I instruct or talk about loving kindness for all beings, I think about this woman I met one year in Switzerland who told me she'd had a really tough year, really just a tremendous amount of difficulty, and she said, the one thought that's kept me going all year is the thought that people in the world are offering loving kindness to all beings everywhere, and I'm a being. And it's not because they've met me or I've done something to kind of deserve it, but just because I exist. There are people of every tradition and outside of formal traditions who, through the commitment of their own hearts, are wishing well and including everybody. And that includes me. So when she said it, I was like, wow, that's really true, you know? And we can actually stop for a moment now and then and realize that is happening. And we can experience ourselves as the recipients of that. And not only that, we can be generating that and making that offering for others. So whenever I lead that particular kind of sitting, I always think, okay, what's the time difference between where I am in Switzerland and like maybe happy, maybe peaceful, you know, whatever's happening for you right now. So the point is practice, practice, practice. How many of you heard Amishi and I on the radio yesterday morning? Amishi and I were both on the, Dr. Jaws, we know her, are both on the radio yesterday morning, and you'll have to tell us the name, I can't remember. The radio show, yeah. Mindful Morning Meta or something.
Mindful Mornings Miami.
Mindful Mornings Miami, and which I think is still on the internet. Like
Jolt
maybe,
Radio.
huh?
It's called Jolt Radio.
Jolt Radio? Like a jolt from, okay. Jolt Radio. And the hostess of the show is very into mindfulness and teaches mindfulness somewhere. And she told that old joke, like, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. And she kept repeating it. You know, someone asked someone for directions. How do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the person says, practice, practice, practice. But she was right, you know. It's about practice, practice, practice. It's like, these are not theoretical explorations. It's putting it into practice and seeing if they prove to be meaningful for you or they make a difference for you. Again, looking at your life as the arena to see if you want to continue, but it's practice, practice, practice. And it's so much easier not to practice, I find. You know, we, for one thing, have a kind of, we tend to have a tendency toward abstraction. Like we feel if we can describe something enough or with enough theoretical background that we really know it cold. And we don't know it at all. I think about myself as a university student in Buffalo, New York, having taken this Asian philosophy course, heard about an independent study program at the university which would send you anywhere for a year. And I think, what an amazing moment that was, where I didn't just say, you know, maybe I'll try to major in religious studies, which would have been nice too, you know, but different. Or, you know, I didn't say, well, maybe I'll just try to go to grad school and keep thinking about these things, or writing more papers about them, or later in my life. Maybe I'll write another book and never practice. Right? It's so easy to do that, and it's so hard to move off of the margins right to the center of possibility. Like, what does this mean for me? What might it mean for me? And that's the right attitude. That's not considered selfish. As one of my teachers, this man named Manindra, said to me, he said, the Buddha's enlightenment solved the Buddha's problem, now you solve yours. And it was the most amazing moment, because I felt like, oh, he thinks I can. He thinks I can solve the problem of the unhappiness that had brought me there to India to begin with. He thinks I can do that. But it's practice, practice, practice. You know, it doesn't happen because you write another book about it. Believe me, you know? And so, you know, so many of you raise your hands when I ask about loving kindness practice. Many more of you may have a mindfulness practice. But with any kind of technique, it's the doing of it that really matters. And so it doesn't have to be an enormous period of time each day. I tend to think it's most pragmatic to try to do some practice every day. I know my own mind. And if I were to say, okay, I'm going to try to practice 3 times a week, it would be Monday, and then I think, you know, I'll wait till Wednesday. And then it's Wednesday, and I think, I'll sit all day on Saturday. Surely that counts for 3 times. And then Saturday, you know, but if I know it's every day, it's easier. 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day, maybe, you know, some people say 7 minutes a day. I think the everydayness of it is most important, and I don't think it's that useful maybe to go for the bare minimum. You know, if you've only got 5 minutes, do 5 minutes. If you've only got 3 minutes, do 3 minutes. But if you've got 15 minutes or 20 minutes, try to do more. And in addition to a formal practice of whatever style you choose to practice, I would suggest what one very kind of renowned old Tibetan Lama high in the Himalayas once called short moments many times. Maybe you've got this 15 or 20 minute block, let's say in the morning, doesn't have to be in the morning, but let's say, where you formally sit or walk or lie down, however you practice. And in addition to that, short moments many times. And this is usually a question of reminders. Whatever reminders you set for you. Like the most famous one these days perhaps comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, his Vietnamese Zen teacher, who said, don't pick up your phone on the first ring. Let it ring 3 times and breathe. Or in terms of loving kindness, people tell me things like, if they're at work, at the beginning of a meeting, they're all sitting around some conference table. One woman said, I look at everybody one by one and I think, but you want to be happy too. And you want to be happy too. And you want to be happy too. And then they start the meeting. Right? It's just short moments. Or, you know, in terms of mindfulness, maybe you try to drink a cup of tea without multitasking. Like for once, just unitask, you know. It's not going to take you so long that your whole to-do list is just going to explode, you know. It's just a cup of tea. But every now and then, try to drink the tea so that you can taste the tea. Robert Frost, speaking of Robert Frost, in one of his last poems, I don't know if it was the very last or close to it, had a phrase something like, life is an interminable chain of longing. But you think, why? Partly because we're never there. What this woman, a friend of mine, is known as a thought leader, whatever that means, Linda Stone, coined the phrase, continuous partial attention, which is what she's describing as our current state. We tend to be paying continuous partial attention, so we're not feeling connected, we don't feel fulfilled, we don't drink that tea and taste it. You know, we're just somewhere else. And so we're always seeking, we always want the next thing, we want more stimulation because we are not really where we are. Well, we can change that. We change that through like a formal practice, we change it through short moments many times. So don't pick up the phone on the first ring. Let it ring 3 times and breathe. I was invited into a financial firm in New York City, and I said that. And I looked up and I saw the complete panic on everyone's faces. I said, okay, for you, just twice. Or a friend of mine is a second generation meditator, and he said his parents started him when he was 7 years old. They bought him a packet of red dots, like sticky things, and they said to him, you can put this anywhere you want on your bedroom wall, so you put all these red dots around. And then they said, every time your eye falls on a red dot, take a breath. And he calls that his first meditation practice. Or people tell me things like, I've decided to write the email and not press send right away. Maybe I write the email and I take a few breaths and I read it again. And then I press send or not. Or if it feels like a particularly controversial or maybe difficult email, somebody said to me, I send it to myself first. And I get to see what it's like to receive. And then I'll go ahead and decide what to do. Or maybe you do go down the street, silently offering loving kindness to everyone that you pass. It's really, it's so creative and interesting to take all these times in our lives, which we're usually, maybe we're impatient or we're distracted. I was walking down the streets of New York not too long ago, and someone was texting, and he barged right into me. And I thought, oh, this is like a caricature. It really happens. And I said to him, I'm not a car, right? So do one thing at a time now and then. Fill the energy of the space with some loving kindness. There's so many options. And it's such an interesting and creative way of using your own life as a kind of creative medium as we do that. So tomorrow we'll continue on. We'll explore relationships. We'll explore compassion for all beings. No doubt we'll explore loving kindness or love for a difficult person. There's a lot to really keep experimenting with. Hello. Do you have any, and I'll also say tonight, homework. See if you can do one of each. See if there's something you can do, either going down the street or some crafting of some activity as a time of practice. So as maybe you're preparing dinner, you're doing loving kindness, which is very interesting. Kind of infusion of energy into the food, or whatever you choose. It could be picking up your phone on the third ring or second ring. Whatever you choose, some activity where you're either sort of making a point of trying to be more mindful or infusing it with some loving kindness. And tonight, maybe before you go to bed, just even for 5 minutes, 3 minutes, see if you could have a formal period of practice. Okay, so do you have any questions or comments before we turn it over to Scott, and then we'll end for the day. Yeah, just let her bring it, microphone.
I see a lot of similarity between phrases and mantras. I have some mantras, and I find them very much helpful and the same as the phrase. You can do it. I can do it any time, and it's really a blessing to have that.
Yeah.
So my question is, what do you think of mantras? And what's the
mantra in which tradition, where you know what it means or where it doesn't have a meaning?
No, I don't know what it means.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, I mean, there are, in some schools of mantra, you don't know what it means. Either it's just a seed syllable or it's said to have its potency for the sound. It doesn't have a meaning. But in this case, we know what it means, really. And the meaning may keep deepening and changing, may be happy, or healthy, what does healthy mean, That might keep deepening and changing, but all along it has a meaning to us. So it's very similar in that way, know.
Good. I also just wanted to say that phrases are very helpful, because I find a difference between mantras and phrases. And my phrases I know thousands of songs, because I grew up loving songs, and I still do, all different kinds. And like, Let It Be, what a great song. Really, that'll live forever.
Yeah.
And it goes in line with some of the things you said. And Come Fly With Me, you know.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Hi, over here. Over here.
Thank you.
Hi, you're welcome. I actually have a very similar question because my practice is in Bhakti, and it feels very similar. It just, so I would just want your opinion on how it might be similar and what are the differences between both practices?
Well, what is your practice?
Chanting mantra and yogic singing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of practices that are, they're very beautiful and they're very personal because it's what we're drawn to and it's what we find onward leading. I'm sort of a generation, partly because I lived in India, which had so many possibilities where, many of us found ourselves doing more than one kind of stream of practice. So some of it depends on your own mind, and some of it depends on what you do when a challenge comes up or an obstacle comes up, and if you feel confident about having a way of almost like incorporating those states into your practice, then, I think it's great. If you have more than one practice that you do have to see how your own mind works, because here's a case where structure and commitment might be useful. Like, I know people who do one practice in the morning and a different practice in the evening, and even between the two we did, between the breath and the phrases, you might find you need to structure it in some way. Either you start with one and then you move to the other in one session, or the session's not long enough and you do it, or you commit to one because you're interested in it primarily for a while, and it's really up to you. Like I saw also with my mind, my own mind, by the time, this is early on, when by the time I knew more than one technique, I would do one for like a minute and a half, and I think, no, something. I better move to the other one. I'd do the other one for maybe, another 60 seconds, and I'd say, well, I'm bored. I better move back, And that's one of the ways I realized I'm the kind of person who really is helped by structure. Again, it's not to feel imprisoned in it, like I must never change midway, but basically to sit down with an intention. Like for this period of time, I am intending to do mindfulness practice, or I'm intending to do loving kindness practice, and then that seems to help me.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
This is a question on this side as well, please.
Okay, you go there, and then we go again.
Do you ever do loving kindness practice for Lucy?
Yes, oh, definitely, loving kindness for Lucy is, the essence of that relationship for Lucy is loving kindness. Like when I say, chill out, Lucy, it may not sound very nice, but it's better than, God damn you, Lucy, how dare you, like, appear again, you should be annihilated, which is an option, as a reaction. It's all infused in that. Hi, Lucy. Chill out, Lucy. Have a cup of tea. Or you can definitely formally do loving kindness practice for. When we get to the difficult person, people will often say, well, it's an attribute within me that I really find difficult. It's not, somebody outside of me, and that's fine. It's the same intricacy and challenge and really finding our way through. So it doesn't feel like giving in. because it's not. But it is holding that really difficult energy in a different way, so that our antagonism is not actually making it worse. You know, the Lucy voice is strengthened, ironically, by our hostility, our fear, our ire, you know, our sense of defeat, like how could it be that you're still here? All those things actually make that voice more overpowering. So while we're not trying to annihilate it, we also don't want it running the show. Because, I mean, basically, as I look back, you know, I wouldn't have done anything if Lucy was really in charge of my decisions. And it doesn't have to be that way, even though she may have did it a lot. Really, loving kindness, kind of tenderness, is the basis for how we want to relate. What's puzzling to us is that I think superficially it feels like it will mean giving in, and it doesn't mean that. And that's why it's an experiment, you know, to see, like, even like from the, going back to the Buddhist tradition, they say that Buddha taught loving kindness as the antidote to fear. Now that makes sense when you start thinking about a difficult energy or a difficult pattern or a difficult physical state or a difficult person, even a really scarily difficult person. If you think of love or loving kindness as just like giving in, it makes no sense. But if you think of it as maybe the end of fear, that makes a lot of sense to at least make the experiment.
So an obstacle I sometimes encounter in my loving kindness practice, maybe others do too. It's kind of a great problem to have, but I love a lot of people. And sometimes I feel like I don't want to leave someone out. So like I'll be offering loving kindness to my mom. When I'm done, I'm like, oh, you know, I also love my dad. I don't want to leave him out. So let me just fit him in there and give him some loving kindness for a bit. But it's like, oh, you know, I've got my mom and my dad, I can't leave out my sisters. And you know what I mean? And I get in this train that just continues, and it's almost obligatory, or it's distracting, it detracts from the practice. And I'm curious if you could offer some insight on that.
Yeah, it is a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Well, you know, really we go back to that balance between concentration and energy. In any one session, if you try to do too many people, you will have a lot of energy, but you'll start to lose concentration. And so usually the suggestion is try to have one per category. Like, you're not going to get in every category either. You know, but like if your benefactors or friends, you know, try to have one, and if it feels too much of a struggle, then what I usually say is have a party at the end. You know, and just bring them all in together. Because if it's too many, you'll just, unless that's not your experience, it was certainly my experience, and it is a common experience that if it's too many, while you will have good energy, you know, and it will feel very alive, it will start, you'll start to lose concentration, and that good energy starts changing to agitation and restlessness and anxiety, and you know, so you don't want to get too out of balance in that way. So I also find that for me and for many people anyway, because this is a very relational practice, it's very easy to lose concentration and get engaged in like a wild amount of story, which will pick up your energy, but will leave you without enough concentration. So these are real beings, you know. We're not being asked, even in like a compassion meditation, nobody's saying, imagine a composite figure that is suffering incredibly. You know, if you're offering loving kindness, say, to a homeless person, it's a homeless person you've seen or you know, right? It's not just your imagination of someone, you know, living on the streets. And so because they're real, that means it's relational, and because it's relational, that means it's complicated. And there's a lot of stories. So I tell this story a lot, and it's a true story. I was sitting in Burma, as I said, in 1985. I went to do this 3-month period of loving kindness practice, and at one point my teacher, his name was Sayadaw Pandita, told me, well, go back to your room and offer loving kindness to a good friend. So I did that, and right away I thought of a good friend, and then I started thinking, what's the time difference between Rangoon and Northampton, Massachusetts? And I think it's dinner time there. I wonder if she went out to dinner. I bet she went out to dinner. Where would she have gone out to dinner? She might have gone to the Greek restaurant, she might have gone to the Italian restaurant. I don't think she could have gone to the Japanese restaurant because I think that one closed. It's really odd. Restaurants on that corner always close. I don't know why they always close. It's very close to Smith College. It's got really good parking. There's no reason for it to always close, but one after another, those restaurants always close. Maybe the spot has really bad feng shui. What is feng shui anyway? Very far from like gathering my energy and maybe happy, maybe. And there is nothing easier to do in this kind of practice because these are beings and relationships are complicated. So I tend to emphasize the concentration part because that's the container. Simplicity, repetition, but again, you don't want to feel imprisoned in that. It needs to be alive and meaningful. There may be times when you drop the phrases. There may be times when you have to really imagine the being, and try to get like the texture and the sense of their presence and make it kind of more direct and distinct in that way. There are all kinds of things we do over time, sometimes just intuitively, but that's sort of the basic premise I'm working on, that the container, the structure is going to help us concentrate. That might be the hardest thing in this type of practice, and keeping an eye still on the energy and the creativity, we might have to slice that. So that's why I say have a party. You don't have to do them one by one, you can just bring them.
My question, Sharon. I think you may have answered much of my question with the answer to the other gentleman's question. I'm participating in the Cultivating Compassion training program here at the University of Miami, and one of the practices is the visualization of somebody that you care about, somebody that brings a smile to your face, and imagine that person suffering. Imagining the person that brings a smile to my face, super easy. I can do that all day long. Imagining them suffering is really much more difficult for me. I immediately want to put the brakes on and go, no, I don't want to think about that. But that's the whole point of the training. So what would you recommend to ease into that, knowing that I just immediately want to close the door on that suffering, I don't want to imagine it, but I know that that's part of the training, that I'm going to have to do that imagination a little bit. How would you recommend to get past that?
Well, the really obvious person to ask is the person doing the training, because it's, probably it has its own integrity in doing that, And there are lots of options, that from my point of view, since I don't teach that, it's really from the outside perspective, or from this perspective. Bringing in equanimity first, for example. Either through mindfulness or reflection, like all things pass. Even as you look for the potential of somebody to suffer, we also reflect on people's strength and resource and connection, because in real life, everything is sort of a mixed bag, and even people with terrible suffering, in a way, we've unfairly categorized them if we don't also admit their strength. You know, the fact that they're not alone, or they have faith, or they have an interest in trying for a better, you know, there's something, and in a way we diminish them also if we only focus on their suffering. And we certainly distance ourselves if we never focus on their suffering, because that is something that could bring us all together. Because even if someone looks like they're just fine, life is so unsteady. It's so changeable, and this comes into play a lot with a difficult person, because we know really from looking at our own experience, which is basically the laboratory, is going back to our own experience. We know that when we act badly, when we cause harm, when we hurt somebody, it's not coming from a great place inside of us. The Buddha said, I think very beautifully, he said, if you truly loved yourself, you'd never harm another. And when we recollect the harm we've caused, because we've all blown it at some time, you know, we almost feel that part of it, you know, the lack of self-love that was coming from it. And that's a reflection. You look at someone else who's causing harm, and you remember, oh, that comes from a place of pain. And that's, you know, again, it doesn't mean you're passive and you don't try to do anything, or you lose your sense of right or wrong, but you understand that from your own experience, something like that. You know, so they all work together, all those practices. And so in what you're bringing up, I'd say, okay, if that's really hard for you, then maybe start with equanimity so that you're going into that. One of the obstacles to equanimity and compassion, or equanimity in the context of compassion, is the feeling that we have to fix everything. You know, that we can't just be a witness to someone's pain or be there and see what evolves or emerges as a possible solution. We go in as the fixer, you know, and then it's a different agenda, right, than having compassion. And so we kind of see all that, and equanimity would be the way to cultivate that first, and then go into a situation or suffering. But again, I'm speaking from the outside, you know.
Yeah, very helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
Somewhat along the same lines, some time ago, I was doing, love and kindness practice, where at each sitting, I would go through the various categories of people. And at that time, I was having a really rough time with a particular person. So when I would get down to that, and I would start maybe be happy, and I said, there's no way I want this guy here. And the reality of it is I couldn't get through that. And I kept trying it. I mean, obviously, it reflected the level of my dislike or anger. And I said, well, I got to keep going and doing this, and ultimately I'll desensitize, and maybe it'll help my relationship with this guy. And I did it for a week or so, and I kept getting angrier. So I stopped, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are about that.
Okay, so again, there's a lot of possibility. There's a lot of different approaches. One is when it's really, really hard, sometimes we do change the phrase. I mean, I know people who want to, and loving kindness is not a coercive activity. It's because you want to make the experiment, I've known people who have wanted to offer loving kindness to people who have really harmed them, and the phrase they could use was something like maybe for your hatred. Because that was something they actually could get behind, and thinking about this other person's happiness was a bridge too far, But then, I co-wrote a book with his friend Bob Thurman called Love Your Enemies. I don't choose my book titles, by the way. And people were saying, I can't really wish that my enemy be happy, and Bob would say, of course you can, because if they were happier, they wouldn't be such a jerk, you know? Along those same lines, that, you know, we act to harm others out of a place of confusion or pain ourselves. If they were happier, they'd behave better. So sometimes you get there that way, but it's fine to change the phrase when you do that. Or sometimes we offer loving kindness to someone along with ourselves, like, may we be happy. That's intriguing. You know, so especially if you feel you're getting angrier and angrier, then I would say play, you know, see if there's some way of, or the text would say, imagine your enemy or difficult person as an infant, you know, so helpless as we all are, and subject to the actions of those around them. Imagine them dying, because in the end, this is what happens. No matter what the grievance, right? We all have to let go of everything. And so there are ways of just experimenting with it. If it's not that you're struggling and you're simply not having a great feeling, then I would just keep going, because that's an interesting experience where I've seen that many times too, where people would say, I didn't have that revelatory moment of forgiveness. It was still, you know, same old work partner that annoys the hell out of me. And the next time I ran into them, this actually happened to a friend of mine. He was at IMS, he was doing loving kindness for a former business partner with a very contentious breakup of the company, and they were still negotiating. And he said he just didn't feel anything. And then he went back home, he went back to work, and the guy came in because they were still negotiating. And apparently my friend looked up at him and said, hi, how are you? And the guy said, is that you? Because that was the first human-to-human exchange they'd had. So the dynamic actually shifted, even though he didn't realize he was shifting because he didn't have that great burst of feeling. So, okay, I can tell our time's up.
Thank you very much for a beautiful day.